Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 5 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto. Today is the 5th day on the 3rd Canto, and we're in the 2nd chapter of the 3rd Canto, which is titled Remembrance of Lord Krishna. Uddhava is explaining remembrances, describing his remembrances as experiences with Lord Krishna to Vidura. And we are in the 2nd section, which is just, he is making his descriptions, and we're going to begin with verse 15. First of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastichade Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha Paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay. So here we go then, beginning with verse 15. Uddhava is speaking to Vidura. The personality of Godhead, the all-compassionate controller of both the spiritual and material creations, is unborn. But when there's friction between his peaceful devotees and persons who are in the material modes of nature, he takes birth just like fire, accompanied by the Mahat Tattva. So, yes, let's have a look at the purport. Prabhupada explains. Devotees, as Uddhava has said, devotees are peaceful. And how come they're peaceful? Because they have no material hankerings. The people who have material hankerings, they can't be peaceful. One who wants to possess things, hankering for things, naturally laments when he loses them. So the devotees are special like that because they have no material hankerings and they have no hankering for spiritual salvation. All they want is to render service, that's all, to the Lord. And in that regard, they don't mind where they serve, how they serve. They don't mind about these considerations. They just want to render service. But the karmis, jnanis, and yogis, of course, they have many desires, either just for material enjoyment, for spiritual liberation, or for mystical powers. They all hankering for either material or spiritual assets. So the devotees, though, they don't want those things, they just want to serve the Lord. It could be in the material world, could be in the spiritual world, whatever the Lord wants. So therefore the Lord's always compassionate towards them. And we go on to the 2nd paragraph. Prabhupada makes the point that karmis, jnanis, and yogis have their own mentalities in the modes. And therefore they're called itara or non-devotees. And sometimes these itaras, non-devotees, even yogis, they harass devotees like Devasa with Ambarish, or Hiranyakashipu even with Prahlad. There's so many incidents of these types. And Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, when such friction takes place, the Lord, out of his great compassion towards his pure devotees, appears in person, accompanied by his plenary portions, controlling the Mahat Tattva. Okay. Third paragraph. The Lord, of course the Lord's everywhere, he's all-pervading, but he appears, he manifests himself for the sake of his devotees. When there's some friction with the non-devotees or from the non-devotees, just as Prabhupada says, just as electricity is generated by friction, the Lord appears also because of this friction. And when he comes, his different plenary portions, they come too. And Prabhupada gives interesting example. When Krishna appeared as Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva, different people had different opinions about who he really was. Is he the Supreme Lord? Is he an incarnation of Narayan? Is he Kshirodakshai Vishnu? But actually he's the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. As described in Bhagavatam 1.3.28, all the other expansions and portions and parts of parts and whatever, they come with him to help out as required. For example, Prabhupada makes the point that when Krishna came, that he killed so many demons, but actually when he killed the demons, it wasn't exactly Krishna who killed them. It was Lord Vishnu. Yes, so in this way, one of the Lord's expansions, Lord Vishnu, he helped out in that regard. Prabhupada cites the term from the verse, Mahad Angsa Yukta, indicates he was accompanied by the Purushas, and they're the ones who create the Mahatattva. Mahatattva was mentioned, of course, in the verse. Then there's also Mahantam Vibhum Atmanam, also confirms that he comes with the Purushas. And finally, the fourth paragraph, so Krishna appeared, just like electricity when there was friction between Kamsa, Vasudeva, Ugrasena. Vasudeva and Ugrasena were devotees. Kamsa, of course, was non-devotee. And in this way, he represented the karmis and jnanis. Yeah. So, Krishna is compared to the sun. He first appeared from the ocean of the womb of Devaki and gradually satisfied people around Mathura. Just as the sun enlivens lotus flowers in the morning. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, after gradually rising to the meridian of Dwaraka, the Lord set like the sun, placing everything in darkness, as described by Uddhava. So we go on to verse 16. Uddhava says, when I think of Lord Krishna, how he was born in the prison house of Vasudeva, although he's unborn, how he went away from his father's protection to Vraja and lived there incognito out of fear of the enemy, and how, although unlimitedly powerful, he fled from Mathura in fear. All these bewildering incidents give me distress. This reminds us of Queen Kunti in the 8th chapter of the 1st canto. She mentions different apparent contradictions about the Lord. But they're not really contradictions. They're glorious features of his nature. So Prabhupada in the purport makes the point that because Krishna is the original person, source of everything, Nothing can be equal to or greater than him. Yes, he's supremely perfect, and when he acts in any capacity, as a son, he's the best son. As a rival, he's the best rival. Even as an object of enmity, he's the best object of enmity. So he does all these things perfectly, so that even the pure devotees who understand that he appears, why he appears, how he appears, and what he does when he appears, but even they become bewildered. So in this case, Uddhava himself, who's speaking, he knows Krishna is eternal and doesn't die, but he lamented for Krishna. So this is all for the Lord's glorification and enjoyment. Just like Prabhupada gives a nice example when a father lies on the floor as if defeated by his son. It's just to give the son pleasure. So Krishna is all-powerful. So he can adjust opposites like birth and no birth, power and defeat, fear and fearlessness. All these things are balanced within him. And the devotee knows this. The devotees, they appreciate how the Lord balances these opposite things. And they become inspired by that, how wonderful our Lord is. He does these things which are just incomprehensible for the average person. But then Uddhava laments, as the devotees do, how the non-devotees cannot grasp these things. And they think that maybe it's imaginary, like that. So they can't resolve these things. But Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, factually there's nothing contradictory. Everything is possible when we understand the Lord as the Lord and not as one of us with all our imperfections. And verse 17, Lord Krishna begged pardon from his parents for their, Krishna and Balaram's, inability to serve their feet due to being away from home because of great fear of Kamsa. He said, O mother, O father, please excuse us for this inability. All this behavior of the Lord gives me pain at heart. So Prabhupada makes the point in the purport. Apparently Krishna and Balaram were afraid of Kamsa and they hid. But how could that be possible? Because they're the Supreme Lord. So is question, is there a contradiction here? Is something wrong? But not really. The thing is that it was to enhance Vasudev's relationship with the Lord, that it made Vasudev really feel that I have to protect my son. So that like that, the apparent inability of the Lord to protect himself enhanced the relationship with the devotee, Vasudev. And because Vasudeva was a devotee, and just anyway, he could understand. He didn't like the idea that Krishna might be killed, just like the parents of any children would not want their children to be killed, of course. So Vasudeva, Prabhupada makes the point, Vasudeva, he handed over Krishna. He promised Kamsa to hand over Krishna, but then he broke the promise. Yes, and he took Krishna from the prison house. Yeah, out of love. And the Lord was pleased with him for that. Krishna didn't want to disturb that mood, the intense affection of Vasudeva as a father. So he agreed to be carried over the Yamuna as if he was himself incapable of looking after himself. And just to test Vasudeva, Krishna fell into the waters of the Yamuna, and Vasudeva panicked and became mad after him as he tried to recover him from the river. So, if we see in these terms, if we think in these terms, we see there's no contradiction. But all these apparent contradictions, they just enhance the relationships. Yeah. Krishna was never afraid of Kamsa at all. But to enhance the relationship with his father, he acted as if he was. And most wonderful thing, he begged pardon from his parents that I wasn't able to serve you because I was absent because of my quote-unquote fear of Kamsa. Prabhupada makes interesting point. That's such instruction by the Lord to the world is appropriate, because even if you're not God, even if you are God, or to speak of if you're not God, then you should serve your parents, because you're indebted to them in so many ways, no matter how great you are. So Prabhupada says, indirectly Krishna wanted to teach the atheists who do not accept the supreme fatherhood of God, and they may learn from this action how much the Supreme Father has to be respected. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by pointing out how Uddhava was just amazed by this glorious behavior of the Lord. And he was really sorry he couldn't go with him. Verse 18, who, after smelling the dust of his lotus feet even once, could ever forget it? Simply by expanding the leaves of his eyebrows, Krishna has given the death blow to those who are burdening the earth. So there's a very short purport here. Actually, it's just one sentence. Prabhupada makes the point that the Lord can't be accepted as a human, even though he played the part of an obedient son. And his actions were so extraordinary that simply by raising his eyebrows, he could deliver death blows. He could just destroy those who are burdening the earth. So on to verse 19. You've personally seen how the king of Chedi, Shishupal, achieved success in yoga practice, although he hated Lord Krishna. Even the actual yogis aspire after such success with great interest by performance of their various practices. Who can tolerate separation from him? So there's a couple of paragraphs of purport here. Prabhupada in the first paragraph explains how Krishna's causeless mercy was seen in Maharaj Yudhisthira's assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice. It was seen in how he was merciful even to Shishupal, the king of Chedi, who was actually extremely malicious towards Krishna, just like Kamsa, Jarasandha. So Shishupal insulted Krishna and was killed by him. But when it happened, everyone saw a light coming out of his body, the soul, and merging into the body of the Lord. So therefore, even this Shishupal, who was just overwhelmed by envy of the Lord, even he achieved oneness with the Supreme, which the Gyanis and Yogis want, and for which they do everything they do. And second paragraph, people who are trying to understand the Supreme Truth by speculation or mystic yoga achieve the same goal as those killed by the Lord personally. They all merge into the rays of his body. So Krishna was merciful in this way to Shishupal, and everyone there saw it, including Vidura, and Uddhava has mentioned that in the verse. Speaking to Vidura, Uddhava says, "You've personally seen how Shishupal achieved success in yoga practice." Yeah. All right, on to verse 20. "Certainly others who are fighters on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were purified by the onslaught of Arjuna's arrows, and while seeing the lotus-like face of Krishna, so pleasing to the eyes, they achieved the abode of the Lord." Yeah, so there's a substantial purport here. First of all, Prabhupada discusses how the Lord comes for what he calls two missionary purposes. First is to deliver the faithful, second is to annihilate the miscreants. And Prabhupada makes the point that even though these two activities seem really quite different, I mean, giving mercy, exchanging love with the devotees, and killing the demons, but actually, ultimately, they're both one and the same, and they're both completely auspicious. Yeah. So the warriors fighting against Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra, they achieved the abode of the Lord, as the devotees do. And Prabhupada makes the point that the words, pleasing to the eyes of the seer, are very significant. Indicates that when those warriors saw the Lord, their dormant love for him was awakened. But Shishupal, when he saw the Lord, his love was not awakened. Yes. So he achieved only oneness, merging into the effulgence of the Lord's body, the Brahmajyoti, whereas those warriors who are fighting against Arjuna, not exactly fighting against the Lord, because to a very large extent he didn't fight at all. So when those warriors saw the Lord, their dormant love for him was reawakened. They went back to Godhead, but not Shishupal. His dormant love was not reawakened, so he just went to the Brahmajyoti. But there were others who are more marginal, not really friends, not enemies, but just slightly in love with him by appreciating the beauty of his face. Well, what happened to them? They went to Vaikuntha. They didn't go to Goloka. They went to Vaikuntha. Prabhupada makes the point that in a certain sense there's no great difference between Goloka and Vaikuntha. But still there is difference. Vaikuntha is full of awe and reverence, and Goloka is just full of natural affection. So Srila Prabhupada goes on. This prema, this love, particularly of the inhabitants of Vrindavan, it's awakened by association with pure devotees. And Prabhupada quotes the term Path Astra Puta. Partha, of course, is Arjuna, and Path Astra means the weapons or arrows of Arjuna. So Prabhupada makes the point, those who saw the beautiful face of Krishna on the battlefield were purified first of all by Arjuna when he shot his arrows. Yes. So the Lord came to diminish the burden of the earth, and Arjuna came along with him to help. And therefore, Arjuna participated by hearing Bhagavad Gita. So, of course, we know initially Arjuna didn't want to fight, but eventually he agreed to, in preference to his own decision. Putting aside his own decision, he agreed to fight because the Lord wanted it. He then accepted the mission of the Lord as his mission, and that particular part of the mission is diminishing the burden of the earth by killing the demons. So in other words, the activities of the pure devotees are executed for the Lord. Nothing's done for their personal gain. So Prabhupada makes the point, therefore we can take it that being killed by Arjuna was as good as being killed by Krishna. Just as if we hear Bhagavad Gita from Prabhupada, it's as good as Arjuna hearing it from Krishna. So yes, anyway, whenever Arjuna fired an arrow at an enemy, then the enemy became purified of all material contaminations and became eligible to be transferred to the spiritual sky. So, but those who appreciated the lotus feet of the Lord and saw his face, but the experience wasn't so deep, then their dormant prema was awakened. So they went to Vaikuntha, and they didn't go to the Brahmajyoti. But Shishupal died without appreciating the Lord, although the others died appreciating the Lord. So both went to the spiritual world, but those who were awakened to love of God went to the planets there, and not just to merge. And the last very short paragraph, I'll just read it. Uddhava seemingly lamented that his own position was less than that of the warriors on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, because they had attained to Vaikuntha, whereas he remained to lament the disappearance of the Lord. Verse 21. This is an interesting statement. Lord Sri Krishna is the Lord of all kinds of threes and is independently supreme by achievement of all kinds of fortune. He's worshipped by the eternal maintainers of the creation, who offer him the paraphernalia of worship by touching their millions of helmets to his feet. So Prabhupada makes the point that Krishna is so kind, so mild and merciful, but he is the Lord of all kinds of threes. And let's consider some of these. He is the Lord of the three worlds. He is the Lord of the three modes. He is the Lord of the three Purushas, Purusha avatars. Yes. He is also the Lord of Shesha, who carries the universes on his hoods. As Manu, he's the original source of all Manus. And of course, each universe has manifestations of 504,000 manus. Yeah. He's also the Lord of the three potencies, the internal potency, external potency, and marginal potency. He's the Lord of Samvit, Sandhini, and Hladini. They're the potencies of Samvit, of consciousness, Sandhini, of existence, eternity, and Hladini, the pleasure potency. And he is the master of 6 kinds of fortune, the 6 opulences: wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, which of course is nothing more than 2 groups of 3, you could say. So therefore everyone should surrender to him. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, "It is not wonderful, therefore, that all the transcendental controllers surrender to him and make all offerings of worship." All right, on to 22. "Therefore, O Vidura, does it not pain us, his servitors, when we remember that he, Lord Krishna, used to stand before King Ugrasena, who was sitting on the royal throne, and used to submit explanations before him, saying, 'O my Lord, please let it be known to you.'" So, the gentle behavior of Krishna with his superiors, like Ugrasena was the king, or with his parents, it bewilders the non-devotees, of course. But a great devotee like Uddhava is not bewildered by the Lord's gentle behavior, for example, with Ugrasena, his loving behavior with his wives, with his friends, with his contemporaries, his behavior as a child with Yashoda, and his naughty dealings with the gopis. Yes, okay. The non-devotees, of course, they're bewildered by these things. So Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, verse 11, Avajananti mam mudha. Fools are bewildered when I appear in the human form. So just continuing on after that, the Sanskrit of the verses quoted, Prabhupada makes the point that people with a poor fund of knowledge belittle him, not knowing his real position. But actually Krishna has made his position clear in Bhagavad Gita. But the demoniac, of course, they won't accept it as it is. They squeeze out their own interpretations to suit their own purposes, their own speculations. And so they mislead unfortunate followers. All they do, Prabhupada says, is they pick up some slogans from the great book of work, but they're unable to estimate who is the Lord. But pure devotees like Uddhava are never misled by these atheistic opportunists. All right, now verse 23, which it's a special verse. It's a very beautiful verse. Uddhava is speaking. "Alas, how shall I take shelter of one more merciful than he, who granted the position of mother to a she-demon, Putana, although she was unfaithful, and she prepared deadly poison to be sucked from her breast." And it's a really nice purport here. Prabhupada begins by saying, here's an example of the extreme mercy of Krishna, even to his enemy, that a noble person can accept good qualities of a person who has otherwise doubtful character. Just as you can accept nectar from a stalk of poison. So, of course, Putana came, we all know the story very well, tried to kill him. And she was a demon, so how could she know he's the Lord? She didn't know. But even though he was a baby, his supreme position was not reduced. He's always supreme, so he just killed her just like that. Second paragraph, Krishna accepted the motherhood of Putana because she pretended to be a loving mother, allowing Krishna to suck her breast. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord accepts the least qualification of the living entity and awards him the highest reward. That is the standard of his character. Therefore, who but the Lord can be the ultimate shelter? Verse 24, Uddhava expresses a type of, it's just a very interesting idea. Very interesting. I consider the demons who are inimical toward the Lord to be more than the devotees, because while fighting with the Lord, absorbed in thoughts of enmity, they, means the demons, are able to see the Lord carried on the shoulder of Garuda, the son of Tarksha, Kashyapa, and carrying the wheel weapon in his hand. So, Prabhupada explores this theme. Those demons who fought against the Lord, they got salvation due to being killed by him, not because they were devotees, but just by the Lord's causeless mercy. So in other words, anyone who's even slightly in touch with the Lord somehow or other is greatly benefited to the point of salvation due to the excellence of the Lord. So he's so kind, he gives salvation to his enemies just because of some contact. So then they become indirectly absorbed in him by their inimical thoughts. Of course, a very important point is that the demons cannot be equal to the pure devotees. But the thing is, Uddhava was thinking of that because of his feelings of separation. He was afraid that at the last stage of his life he might not be able to see the Lord face to face, as those demons did. Right at the last moment of their lives, they saw the Lord, and then bang, they were dead. But actually, Prabhupada makes the point that the devotees are rewarded by hundreds. What does Prabhupada say? Are rewarded many hundreds and thousands of times more than the demons by being elevated to the spiritual planets. So they're elevated to the spiritual planets to associate with the Lord, not just to merge. So of course, generally the demons, the impersonalists, are also generally demons, or at least demoniac, partly demoniac. Generally the demons, impersonalists, they only merge in Brahma Jyoti, whereas the devotees go to the spiritual world. So, the pleasure of the devotees on the spiritual planets is so much greater than that of those who merge. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the impersonalists, therefore, are no more favored than the enemies of the Lord, Rather, they're both on the same level of spiritual salvation. Verse 25, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, being prayed to by Brahma to bring welfare to the earth, was begotten by Vasudeva in the womb of his wife Devaki in the prison of King Kamsa. Yeah. So Prabhupada makes an interesting point at the beginning of the short purport, that even though, just like with the sun, there's no real difference between sun rising, sun setting, it's just part of a cycle. So similarly, there's no difference between the Lord's appearance and disappearance, but still generally the devotees don't like to discuss his disappearance. So Vidura inquired about these things indirectly by asking Uddhava to relate Krishna Katha or just any topics to do with the Lord. So therefore, Uddhava has begun these topics from the beginning of his appearance. 26. Thereafter his father, being afraid of Kamsa, brought him to the cow pastures of Maharaj Nanda, and there he lived for 11 years, like a covered flame, with his elder brother, Baladev. Okay, so there was no necessity for the Lord to go to Nanda Maharaj's place out of fear of Kamsa, no necessity at all. But anyway, it's the business of the demons to try to kill the Lord or to prove that he doesn't exist or that Krishna is an ordinary human. So, you could imagine perhaps that if people are talking about you, like publicly, in front of other people, and they're talking nonsense about you, like saying you don't exist, or saying that they want to kill you. So, of course, you'd be upset, wouldn't you? But Krishna's not affected by these things. But still, to play the role of a child, he agreed to be taken to Gokula because Vasudeva was afraid of Kamsa. So therefore it was arranged that Nanda and Yashoda would have Krishna during his childhood pastimes. So, therefore, to fulfill all these points, he went there. Stayed there about 11 years with Balaram. And of course, Vasudeva's fear is just a part of the transcendental relationship. Yeah. It's part of the nectar. Yeah. The Lord enjoys more when someone takes him as a subordinate son who needs his father's protection than he does when someone accepts him as the Supreme Lord. It's all transcendental ecstasy for him. It's just all transcendental joy, actually. Yes. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, thus, when Vasudeva, out of fear of Kamsa, carried him, Krishna, to Vrindavan, the Lord enjoyed it. Otherwise, he had no fear from Kamsa or anyone else. Let's go on to verse 27. In his childhood, the Almighty Lord was surrounded by cowherd boys and calves, and thus he travelled on the shore of the Yamuna River through gardens densely covered with trees and filled with vibrations of chirping birds. So Prabhupada explains that Nanda Maharaj was a landholder for Kamsa, and because he was a Vaishya, he had many cows. And Krishna, as a child, was given charge of the calves with his friends. And the Bhagavatam says, actually, that these cowherd boys were great rishis and yogis in their previous births. And after many such pious births, they got the Lord's association. And of course, they didn't care who he was, but just played with him as friends. And they were so fond of the Lord that at night, when they all went to take rest, they could only think of the next morning when they'd meet him again and play again. So second paragraph is description of the forests by the Yamuna, beautiful gardens full of trees, mango, jackfruit, apples, guava, oranges, grapes, berries, palm fruit, and so many other trees and fragrant flowers. Because it was by the river, because the forest was by the river, there were so many birds there. And all these entities, they're all pious beings born in Vrindavan just to give Krishna pleasure. So there's another paragraph, how, and it begins at least, that while Krishna was there in Vrindavan, he killed many demons. Even though he seemed like a child, he was like the covered flames of a fire. And which means that as a small particle of fire can kindle, can cause a great fire, so Krishna killed all those great demons. And therefore, if we go, or when we go to Vrindavan, even now we can feel transcendental bliss, even though Krishna is not exactly there in the completely personal way. So Lord Chaitanya, he recommended Vrindavan. He said it's identical with Krishna, and therefore it's worshipable by the devotees. So therefore Uddhava and Vidura also went there to have direct contact with him, visible or not. And Prabhupada makes the point at the end of the purport, thousands of devotees still wander there, preparing to go back to Godhead. 28. When the Lord displayed his activities just suitable for childhood, he was visible only to the residents of Vrindavan. Sometimes he would cry and sometimes laugh, just like a child. And while so doing, he would appear like a lion cub. So Prabhupada makes the point, if we want to enjoy the childhood pastimes of Krishna, we have to follow the footsteps of Nanda Maharaj, Upananda, and other parental devotees. And Prabhupada talks a bit about the relationships between the Lord and his parental devotees. That a child may cry for something, create a disturbance, but after getting it, laugh. Yes. So this crying and laughing is enjoyable for the parents and other elders of the family. So therefore Krishna would do this and they would enjoy. So only devotees can enjoy these things, not impersonalists. And Prabhupada makes a very interesting point that sometimes when attacked in the forest by demons, Krishna would be amazed, but then he would kill them. So amazed that this potency of mind can do things like this. So his parents, his friends who are watching all this will also be amazed, and when they went home they'd tell their parents, and everyone would appreciate the qualities of the Lord. So therefore, you can say, Prabhupada makes the point, that Krishna therefore didn't belong just to his parents, but to all the Brijbasis. And Prabhupada concludes the purport, everyone loved Krishna. He was the life and soul of everyone, including the animals, the cows and the calves. Okay, on to verse 29. We're getting close to the end of the purport. You never know. We might even finish it. The chapter rather. So verse 29. While herding the very beautiful bulls, the Lord, who is the reservoir of all opulence and fortune, used to blow his flute, and thus he enlivened his faithful followers, the cowherd boys. So Prabhupada explains that when Krishna reached 6 or 7 years old, he was given the charge of looking after the cows and bulls. From 3 till about 6, he was looking after the calves. So his father Nanda Maharaj was a wealthy landholder. You can be considered rich if you have many cows and grains. Because with just these things, all economic problems can be solved. Everything else is artificial. Yeah. Artificial necessities created by man to kill his valuable life at the human level and wasting his time in things which are not needed. Yeah. And Krishna showed that himself by just being absorbed in the cowherding way of life. So, Prabhupada explains that, all the Vaishyas should herd cows. The cow is the mother, she gives milk. The bull is the father, because he tills the ground to grow grains. So human society, Prabhupada says, will kill its spirit of life by killing their fathers and mothers. So the cows, Prabhupada mentions, the cows and bulls were of different colors, even various checkered colors. Red, black, green, yellow, ash, etc. And because of their colors and healthy, smiling features, the atmosphere was enlivening. So, over and above, of course, all of this, Krishna would play the flute, and this would give his friends great pleasure. So they'd forget about any talk of impersonalism. Those friends were living entities who'd accumulated many pious reactions so they could enjoy with the Lord and hear his flute. And at the end of the purport, Prabhupada quotes Brahma Samhita chapter 5 verse 30, which is describing the flute. You can just read through that. Or describing Krishna playing the flute. Okay, on to verse 30. The great wizards who were able to assume any form were engaged by the king of Bhoja, Kamsa, to kill Krishna. But in the course of his pastimes, the Lord killed them as easily as a child breaks dolls. So Kamsa, of course, he's famous for trying to kill Krishna. Just immediately after his birth in the prison, he wanted to kill Krishna, but he failed. But later he heard that Krishna was in Vrindavan, so he sent many demons, different forms. I mean, they're Aga, Baka, Putana, etc. And they tried to kill Krishna, but all of them were killed by him, as if he was just playing with dolls and other toys. So, children play with toys, they break their toys. So in front of the Lord, the demons were just like toys in the hands of a playful child. So he'd just break them. Here's an interesting statement in the purport. Jnana, yoga, and bhakti are three recognized processes of spiritual realization. The perfection of such processes can lead one to the desired goal of life and spiritual value, but that does not mean that one can attain a perfection equal to the Lord's by such endeavors. The Lord's always the Lord, whether he's with Mother Yashoda, playing with his friends. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, he continued to remain God without the slightest diminution of his six opulences. Thus he is always unrivaled. So on to verse 31. The inhabitants of Vrindavan were perplexed by great difficulties, because a certain portion of the Yamuna was poisoned by the chief of the reptiles, Kaliya. The Lord chastised the snake king within the water and drove him away. And after coming out of the river, he caused the cows to drink the water and proved that the water was again in its natural state. We'll carry on tomorrow from verse 32. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.